go ahead and we're going to take a look at the architecture of Liferay and all the various technologies that are used to make Liferay run. So we're going to start off with some of the different standards that we use within Liferay. So the biggest one right now is the JSR. So JSR 168, 286, and 362, the portlet specification. Right? We discussed earlier how portlets are really the foundation of developing applications within Liferay, as well as gaining an understanding of how we can manipulate or override some of the backend of Liferay. So the JSR or the portlet specifications are one of the most important when we're discussing the architecture of Liferay. Now, there are some other ones behind the scenes as well. The JSF, so this is helping us create some component-based web applications using Java server faces. And so Liferay is a contributor to the JSF specifications. ECMAScript, Liferay does support ECMAScript or ES6 or ECMAScript 2015. So all of our web browsers do conform to the specification defined over there. When we're using or creating web services in the Liferay world, right, we have two different technologies that are helping us out. Right, there is JAX-WS, which is the XML-based web services, predominantly SOAP, and JAX-RS. This is for RESTful services. So both of those are incorporated within Liferay, and we can create these services in one of these different ways. Now, again, one of the most pivotal, if not the most, in this discussion is the OSGi release number 6. Right? Liferay is built on top of OSGi. Much of what we're doing is done using OSGi. So this specification, this standard is very, very important, as we have already seen and discussed. So some of the key aspects of the OSGi standard is the runtime itself, right? The OSGi container, right? Declarative services as a means of creating our components, as well as providing a very dynamic way of managing them. And a third one is called the configuration admin. This is a way in which we're able to create configurable applications and have them be able to be configured on the fly. So in other words, you can have an application and you can set the settings of that application whenever you want. So there's no need to restart Liferay or anything like that. You set it and then the properties take effect. So pretty cool here. In the UI, we're going to see this under the section known as System Settings. So again, we've also discussed how there are a couple of different implementations of the OSGi standard that is implemented within Liferay. So Apache Felix, Eclipse, Equinox. Some other technologies that we use within Liferay, of course, Java EE or J2EE, depending on how you want to refer to it today. Right. So OSGi, we've talked about that. A couple other ones behind the scenes. Spring, we mainly use Spring for dependency injection, but transactions behind the scenes as well. Hibernate as a means of database access and communicating with the database. Our caching mechanism is using EHCache, and then for our search and indexing, we by default use Elasticsearch, but we also support Solr. So some of those core technologies, and if you're ever browsing the web, right, you'll see some of the different icons here. So let's take a look at the whole sort of Liferay architecture and some of the various technologies that are integrated here. So let's first start off with the various things that could be authenticating or trying to log into Liferay. So of course we can log in through our web browsers, right? That's typically what we're going to be doing. as well as our mobile phones and our tablets. So different devices can use its respective web browsers to authenticate into Liferay. As technology progresses, right, we have the Internet of Things, which may also be accessing Liferay as well. Wearables, coffee makers, refrigerators, our cars, and so on and so on. We can also create some applications that are native to mobile devices, right? We can also create applications using various JavaScript frameworks as well. All three of these, browsers, IoT, mobile apps, can authenticate into Liferay. When we're going through the authentication layer, a lot of different ways we can authenticate: LDAP, SSO, Facebook, SAML, Google Auth, right, OAuth, HTTP request headers, and so on. So once we get through the authentication layer, we then hit the front end. Right? The front end can be built using specific portal UIs such as Bootstrap, Lexicon, Bourbon, Metal.js, and so on. Right? We can have various gadgets such as Google, Open Social, and so on coming from outside sites. And we can also have portlet-specific UIs where we create them using something like JSPs. On the other end, we might have a Liferay mobile native app, for example, accessing the APIs of Liferay. We can access those APIs through SOAP, JSON, and REST. Right? Whether we're coming from the front end, hitting our APIs, from there's going to be a lot of Liferay services that are going to be helping us do various things. So the implementation of the APIs, for example. From there, right, we hit the next layer, and there's a lot of things happening behind the scenes. So we can start off over here on the left with the Liferay's persistence layer. Right? We saw how we can connect to a number of different databases: MySQL, SQL Server, Oracle DB, and so on. You can also have your document storage in the cloud as well within an Amazon S3 bucket, or maybe you have your own file system somewhere else with a NAS or a SAN, for example. Liferay's document repository has a couple of areas that it can be stored. Right? You can integrate your document repository with SharePoint or Documentum, or we can have them in the cloud or in a specific file system. When we're dealing with search, right, the two big search engines that Liferay uses or supports is Elastic and Solr. Right? We have also the ability to customize how Liferay's search and indexing works. So we'll cover that in a later section. Now, workflow. How are things reviewed from the beginning to the end? Liferay has its own workflow engine called Kaleo to help us out. And finally, over here on the left-hand side, a bunch of different services to do things like caching, auditing. We have our own message bus, analytics, and as well as scheduling. So all of that to say, Liferay's architecture is pretty vast, and there's a lot of different aspects to it. When we look specifically within Liferay, we can break it down into something like this. So we have the user interface using portlets, or maybe a native mobile application, or a standalone application such as Liferay Sync. Right? These user interfaces interact with some sort of controller layer, which is implemented by portlets, handled by MVC commands, as well as struts commands. We can have a bunch of services handling persistence layer actions like putting something into the database, retrieving something from the database, caching, authentication, and kind of the list goes on. Persistence layer, we talked about that. The database, how we store our documents in media, right, or placing things within the cloud. Search index, and we also have the web services. All of that to say, we have the ability to customize all of these things, whether it's the UI of Liferay, how services are called, how things are persisted in the database, we have control over that, and we have the ability to manipulate and override these different aspects of Liferay. So moving forward, we're going to be seeing the different tools and the different concepts that are going to be helping us modify the different aspects of Liferay.